The gavel cracked and the room held its breath as Evelyn Cross said, "That sound will haunt me." She stepped into the corridor and her phone rang like a trap snapping shut. Cade Rivera said, "You do not know what they buried." She froze as echoes chased her. Jonah Reed steadied her shoulder and said, "I am here until the end." A second call slid in from a blocked number. A measured voice said, "Walk away, Evelyn." Mara Vale arrived with warmth that felt like a blanket in a storm. She said, "You are not alone tonight." Evelyn stared at the courthouse seal and saw a shadow between its lines. Marcus Hale stepped from a column and smiled without warmth. He said, "Justice is a lens, not a mirror." The dial tone bled into the halls like a siren. Evelyn whispered, "Where is the witness?" The floor shimmered with wax and doubt. In the silence, a name returned like a bruise. Lila Soren. Evelyn stood under the awning and counted the seconds between lightning and thunder. She said, "Lila never ran from a promise." Jonah watched the street and said, "Then someone moved her like a piece." Mara's voice smoothed the air, and she said, "Grief bends memory. Let us check the record, not the ache." Cade slipped closer and said, "She called me last week. She used a word that tasted like ash." Evelyn felt the floor tilt at that. Marcus crossed the lobby as if time obeyed him and said, "Missing is a flexible term." Jonah shifted to block him. He said, "Not tonight." The courthouse doors sighed shut behind them. Evelyn said, "If they sealed her away, we break the seal." The thunder rolled like a verdict, and something unseen listened. They moved to the records annex where old air smelled like tape and dust. Mara said, "Truth lives in margins." Cade traced a map on the wall and said, "She circled the river warehouses." Evelyn opened a ledger and said, "These deliveries skip a week." Jonah said, "A hole is the loudest entry." Marcus' reflection appeared in the glass case, and he said, "Patterns are confessions that think they can hide." Evelyn closed the book and said, "Lila marked a path we must walk." Cade said, "Then we walk fast." Mara's hand hovered near Evelyn's and said, "Take breath before we run." Outside, sirens stitched the night into tight lines that would not loosen. The service elevator groaned as it rose from the basement like a reluctant witness. Jonah said, "We keep together." Cade flicked a pocket light and said, "I know a door that should not exist." Mara said, "Secrets love locked steel." The gate rattled open on a corridor of peeling paint. Marcus waited at the far end and said, "This is trespass dressed as virtue." Evelyn stepped forward and said, "Virtue can kick in a door." Jonah moved to her flank. Cade pointed to a panel that did not sit flush and said, "Here." The hum behind it felt like held breath. Somewhere above, rain hammered the roof like impatient fingers. Cade pried the panel, and the hidden room exhaled cold air that smelled like solvent and fear. Inside lay a chair bolted to the floor and a camera that did not blink. Mara said, "Someone staged memory here." Jonah said, "Or erased it." Evelyn found a ribbon with Lila's name pressed into dust and said, "She was here." Marcus touched the doorframe and said, "Rooms like this tidy stories." Cade said, "Then we untidy them." Evelyn lifted the camera and said, "We make it speak." The thunder softened as if the storm paused to listen. In that hush, a small red light on the wall came alive. Evelyn pressed her palm to the ribbon and felt the cold of stone seep into her bones. She said, "She left this for me to find." Jonah leaned near and said, "Then she trusted you above us all." Mara folded her arms, voice low, and said, "Or she had no one else." Cade whispered, "She wanted me to keep quiet, but I couldn't." Marcus lingered at the threshold and said, "Every trace left behind is a choice, not an accident." Evelyn closed her eyes and said, "The guilt I carry is not hers, but mine." The silence grew thick like water rising. Jonah shifted uneasily, his loyalty fraying. Mara touched Evelyn's arm and said, "The weight is yours to hold, but not alone." The team stepped into the annex where broken windows let rain seep across the floor. Jonah said she trusted the wrong people once, and it cost her everything. Evelyn's voice cracked as she said, "I should have been there." Cade's hands trembled as he said, "She left me a sketch I burned out of fear." Mara said, "Fear turns memory into poison." Marcus smirked and said, "Or into leverage." Jonah clenched his fists and said, "Do not twist this." Evelyn stared at the rain dripping from the ceiling and said, "Every drop sounds like her voice." The silence after her words dragged heavy, binding them closer yet pushing them apart. They gathered at a diner booth where neon hummed against glass. Mara slid sugar packets into rows and said, "Justice is pattern, not passion." Evelyn said, "Justice is her name being spoken aloud." Jonah said, "I stood by you before, I will again, but my oath once betrayed another." Cade leaned forward and said, "Truth is sharp, not safe." Marcus stirred his coffee and said, "Truth is pliable in the right hands." Evelyn's hand shook as she lifted her cup and said, "Then I will hold it steady." Outside, the neon buzzed like a heartbeat in wires, binding the group in uneasy silence. At the safe house, maps sprawled across the table. Cade jabbed a marker and said, "These warehouses match her notes." Jonah said, "But one of them is watched by men we cannot face openly." Evelyn said, "Then we face them in shadows." Mara whispered, "Shadows are costly, they take more than they give." Marcus said, "Yet you step into them anyway because light is rarely honest." Evelyn's jaw set firm as she said, "We go where she walked." The lamp above flickered once and settled, as if agreeing or warning. Silence wrapped the room until only the storm outside dared to speak. The night deepened as they drove toward the riverfront. Rain lashed against the windshield like accusations. Jonah said, "If betrayal waits, I will not forgive myself." Evelyn whispered, "Forgiveness is not part of tonight." Mara touched the dashboard lightly and said, "Then memory will punish in its place." Cade muttered, "I just want her voice back, even if it damns us all." Marcus in the back seat said, "Voices are never gone, only hidden in walls we build." Evelyn gripped the wheel and said, "Then we tear them down." The car's headlights cut through the storm, the road ahead a jagged thread of fate. The car stopped near the warehouses where rain became mist clinging to steel walls. Evelyn whispered, "This place swallows sound." Jonah stepped closer, eyes scanning, and said, "Tracks here were covered too neatly." Cade crouched and pointed to a wet boot print, saying, "Someone stood here long after she vanished." Mara rubbed her arms and said, "Absence can weigh heavier than presence." Marcus leaned against the post, voice even, and said, "You see only what you are meant to see." Evelyn turned sharply and said, "I see a crime trying to vanish itself." Oh. Lightning cut across the sky and shadows moved as if watching. Inside the warehouse, beams of flashlights revealed stacked crates. Jonah said, "Evidence could be hidden in plain sight." Cade's voice trembled as he said, "Her sketch showed a circle here." Evelyn brushed dust from a crate and said, "The serial numbers are filed off." Mara said, "This is a place for erasing, not keeping." Marcus smirked and said, "Or for storing what truth cannot afford to show." Jonah slammed his fist and said, "You twist everything." Evelyn whispered, "Then untwist it before it strangles us." The echo of her words hung like a warning no one could quiet. They found a locked cage, with chains rusted yet recently moved. Evelyn said, "She was held here." Jonah kicked at the lock and said, "It's staged to mislead us." Mara placed a hand on the chain and said, "Pain clings to metal." Cade hissed, "I heard her voice here once, I swear it." Marcus's smile faded as he said, "Belief makes ghosts louder." Evelyn shook her head and said, "Not ghosts, witnesses." The room carried every whisper back to them, layering truth with memory until none could tell which voice belonged to the present. Jonah found papers half burned in a barrel. He said, "These names are witnesses." Evelyn grabbed one and said, They are being erased systematically. Mara's face dimmed as she said, then Lila was part of a pattern, not an accident. Cade whispered, I can still hear her humming. Marcus's tone hardened as he said, patterns are made to be controlled. Jonah turned to him and said, you know more than you admit. Evelyn clenched the papers and said, then we make the pattern break itself. The rain outside roared as though the city was trying to drown their resolve. They exited to the riverbank where fog hung low and barges moaned in the distance. Evelyn said, she stood here before they took her. Jonah traced the mud with his boot and said, dragged, not walked. Cade's voice cracked as he said, she hummed this tune, and it died mid-note. Mara closed her eyes and said, memories cling like wet clothes. Marcus said, the river carries what should never resurface. Evelyn's fists tightened as she said, then we dive if we must. The water rippled against the bank, like a warning, dark and unyielding. The rain eased into mist as they sheltered beneath the warehouse overhang. Jonah's shoulders stiffened as he said, I once swore to protect her, but I chose another cause. Evelyn turned sharply and said, you betrayed her. Mara's voice trembled. You carried guilt in silence. Cade shouted, you let her vanish. Marcus's lips curved, even anchors break when weighed down enough. Jonah's hands shook as he said, I thought it would save us all, but I was wrong. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. You carried betrayal as duty. Lightning exposed Jonah's face, not with pride, but shame that silenced every breath. They pushed deeper into the warehouse office where papers littered the desk. Evelyn slammed her palm down and said, the missing witness did not run. She was buried alive by design. Mara's voice quivered. We chased ghosts while truth rotted near us. Cade held a file tight and said, her name is erased in every line. Jonah whispered, I helped seal the file. Evelyn's fury burned. You erased her existence to protect a lie. Marcus leaned in with a calm tone. Lies are scaffolding for power. Evelyn snapped, then we burned the scaffolding. Thunder cracked like a gavel outside. The group descended into a sublevel where damp walls smelled of rust. Evelyn ran her hand over scraped concrete and said, she was dragged here. Jonah whispered, her blood is on my oath. Mara said, pain lingers in this silence. Cade pressed his ear to the wall and said, I hear her hum again. Marcus's shadow stretched wide as he said, memories lie when you want them most. Evelyn snapped, not this one. The air thickened. Every echo a plea unanswered. Jonah dropped to his knees, unable to hold his mask. Evelyn whispered, truth will not stay buried. They uncovered a hidden chamber, lined with shelves of altered files. Evelyn yanked one down and said, they rewrote her life. Cade shouted, they erased her like chalk. Mara whispered, this is not a file room, it is a graveyard of names. Jonah muttered, I stamped approvals without knowing. Marcus calmly said, knowledge is choice. You chose blindness. Evelyn's hands trembled as she said, no more names vanish. The room hummed with silent witnesses, each file a ghost waiting to be read. Mara clutched Evelyn's arm and said, then we make them breathe again. The storm outside broke fully as they gathered around the desk stacked with stolen truth. Evelyn raised her voice. The missing witness was silenced because she threatened the core. Jonah said she held proof that tore their empire. Cade said her words were heavier than bullets. Mara said, then her silence is our burden to end. Marcus smirked faintly and said, yet you will fail, because truth bends before power. Evelyn slammed her fist and said, then we break power itself. The storm raged, windows rattling like chains about to snap. The truth no longer hid, it demanded war. The courthouse chamber filled with tension as the storm raged beyond stained glass. Evelyn stood at the front and said, this truth will be heard tonight. Jonah's face tightened as he said, they will tear you apart for it. Mara whispered, every word cuts deeper than a blade. Cade slammed a folder onto the desk and said, this is her voice on paper. Marcus's tone flowed smooth as oil. You confuse passion with proof. Evelyn's eyes flashed as she said, proof does not ask for permission. The chamber grew hushed as thunder rolled, each sound mocking a heartbeat in trial. Evelyn opened the file and said, she named them before they silenced her. Jonah's hands clenched at his sides as he said, and I helped bury it. Mara's voice trembled. Her truth lives again, even if it kills us. Cade whispered, she trusted me with this sketch. I failed once, but not now. Marcus's smile curved cold. The court of power will never allow this to live. Evelyn met his gaze and said, then we stand against that court. Lightning flared, illuminating their faces as each bore the weight of a moment too heavy to escape. Jonah stepped forward and said, I betrayed her to shield us, but in shielding I killed her voice. Evelyn said, then speak now and undo what you buried. Mara's eyes glistened as she said, confession is the cruelest kind of justice. Cade muttered, cruel or not, it's all we have. Marcus' tone hardened, this confession changes nothing. Power is death. Evelyn's voice thundered, then let it echo until walls cracked. Jonah bowed his head, voice shaking, Lila's proof was real, and I destroyed it. Silence froze around them as truth burned like lightning through glass. Mara stepped into the circle of light and said, I comforted her. But I whispered compromise behind her back. Evelyn's voice cut sharp, you betrayed not just her but every bond we had. Cade's voice rose, you were her warmth, how could you burn her trust? Marcus's calm tone laced through, kindness is the sweetest poison. Mara's hands trembled as she said, I thought I could protect her by silencing her pain. Jonah snapped, you only gave her chains. Evelyn's hand slammed the desk, every betrayal binds us tighter to the truth we cannot deny. The silence screamed louder than words. Marcus rose with a grace carved from decades of control. He said, you shout into a void thinking it will answer. Evelyn said, the void is cracking tonight. Jonah said, I chose wrong, but I stand here now. Mara whispered, I betrayed love, not truth, and I will carry that forever. Cade's voice cracked, her sketch bleeds louder than our silence. Marcus smirked, you are pawns mistaking yourselves for players. Evelyn's voice rang like iron, then we shatter the board. Thunder shook the walls, and the storm outside mirrored the war rising within, justice hanging by threads of flame. The courthouse emptied, leaving echoes sharper than voices. Evelyn said, we exposed them, but justice has not arrived. Jonah leaned on the railing and said, truth can drown without law. Mara whispered, she still lingers, bound to silence. Cade pulled the sketch from his pocket and said, this is all I saved of her. Marcus's calm voice sliced through, exposing them means nothing without power to punish. Evelyn's eyes hardened, then we give her justice outside their walls. The storm had quieted, but the silence afterward screamed with weight heavier than thunder. They stood outside where dawn painted the city in bruised light. What? Evelyn said. Justice was stolen, twisted beyond shape. Jonah muttered, and we let it happen. Mara's voice cracked, her memory burns in me like fire. Cade raised the sketch high and said, this is her voice, louder than ours combined. Marcus folded his hands and said, voices without power are whispers in a storm. Evelyn's reply cut sharp, then we roar until silence breaks. The city stirred awake around them, blind to the storm that raged in their circle, a storm still seeking blood and closure. They returned to the hidden file room, its silence thicker than before. Evelyn lifted the files and said, her truth is here. We make it eternal. Jonah's voice cracked, I'll carry her name every day until I die. Mara whispered, names breathe only if spoken. Cade's eyes blazed, then we write her name where no one can erase it. Marcus smirked faintly, eternity is fragile when ink meets fire. Evelyn slammed the folder down and said, then we carve it into stone. The bulb overhead buzzed weakly, casting shadows like ghosts of every erased life. By the riverbank, fog crawled across the water. Evelyn held the ribbon tight and said, "She was here, her last breath tied to this place." Jonah's voice cracked. "Forgive me, Lila, I failed you." Mara's whisper shook. "Her memory holds us prisoner." Cade stepped forward and said, "Her humming still lives in these waters." Marcus said, "Water washes everything, even memory." Evelyn shouted, "Not this time." The fog swirled as though stirred by unseen hands. The river seemed to whisper back, carrying the missing witness presence like an unfinished song waiting to be heard. They gathered one last time in the courthouse corridor, the storm now just a memory. Evelyn said, "Justice twisted, cannot erase her voice." Jonah's voice cracked. "I will live as her shadow bearing her truth." Mara whispered, "I will carry her kindness, though I betrayed it." Cade said, "Her sketch is my oath, never erased again." Marcus's voice lingered cold. "You honor ghosts, while the living still rule." Evelyn glared at him and said, "The living will fear what she left behind." The silence closed like a door, leaving them in a hall haunted not by absence, but by memory. The city woke with indifference while headlines spilled across newsstands. Evelyn whispered, "The world will read her name but never know her face." Jonah said, "Her truth is carved in shadows, not in ink." Mara murmured, "But shadows live longer than light." Cade tapped the folded sketch and said, "This is all she left me, yet it weighs more than 1,000 verdicts." Marcus's voice echoed, "The world forgets fast, and memory fades faster." Evelyn's eyes narrowed, "Not this memory." The morning sun broke the clouds, but its warmth never reached their faces. At the courthouse steps, Evelyn stood motionless, staring at the stone that had witnessed too much. Jonah said, "Do we call this justice?" Evelyn's voice was brittle. "Justice is not a word, it is a wound that never closes." Mara's eyes welled as she whispered, "We fought, but victory tastes like ash." Cade said still, "Her name is louder now than silence ever was." Marcus's measured tone drifted. "Names fade when time chooses to bury them." Evelyn shot back, "Then time will choke on hers." The wind carried the words away, but their weight lingered, heavy as stone. In the quiet cemetery, Evelyn placed the ribbon on an unmarked grave. She whispered, "We never gave her justice, but we give her memory." Jonah lowered his head. "Her silence speaks through us now." Mara touched the ribbon lightly and said, "I betrayed her once, but I will guard her forever." Cade's voice cracked. "She still hums when I close my eyes." Marcus's voice was low, almost gentle. "Ghosts bind tighter than chains." Evelyn said, "Then let this ghost bind us to truth." The air stilled as if the earth itself listened and carried the vow. At the riverbank once more, fog drifted over the water like breath of the lost. Evelyn said, "Here she vanished, here she lingers." Jonah whispered, "The river holds her final song." Mara's eyes glistened, "And we carry its echo." Cade held the sketch against the fog and said, "She belongs here and everywhere." Marcus's voice sliced the mist. "Memory binds you to grief. Power moves forward." Evelyn said, "Then let grief sharpen us into weapons." The water lapped softly, yet each ripple sounded like footsteps leading into eternity. Night fell and the courthouse loomed in silhouette, its windows dark, its secrets intact. Evelyn whispered, "The missing witness is gone, but her truth walks with us." Jonah's voice was low. "We broke chains but left scars." Mara said, "I gave her betrayal, I now give her eternity." Cade whispered, "Her hum will follow me until my last breath." Marcus's words lingered like a curse. Truth fades when power wills it. Evelyn faced the courthouse and said, "Then let her truth haunt them forever." The wind howled through the empty halls, carrying a line that refused to die.